Greetings, YouTube. Greetings, everyone. And please welcome back my regular guest, Koki Pirate.
Howdy ho.
And a newcomer. He's been on my channel before, but he's not actually done Doctor Who Fridays before, Mr. Ian Warner.
Hello there, YouTube.
Aha, and since you're new and some of the audience might not know you, why don't you just fill us in on the kind of person you are?
Yeah, I'm Ian Warner. I am known amongst the community of tabletop role-playing game writers and critics as the craziest guy in the industry. Well, that's what one particular pundit called me. I design very weird and wacky role-playing games, and also through YouTube do some media commentary. I used to have a review show called Is It Awesome, but it disappeared when Blip decided to get all snooty. I'm hoping to put them back up at some point, but I'll need to find somewhere to put them.
Oh, right. Aha, okay, and was this your first time watching the War Machines?
Yes, it was. I'd heard a lot about the War Machines, and I'd seen, like, clips of bits and bobs of particularly certain sort of still images of sort of facial reactions and things like that, but I'd never really seen it in all its glory. And my word, what a show!
Oh, okay. And would you say that you're a William Hartnell man? Are you a fan of the First Doctor?
Every time I've seen him, he's impressed me as the Doctor.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever seen something bad with him in it, and I know I have been listening to the show, and I have heard that there are these bad episodes, but I can't really see him being, because the one thing that, because of course he is the First Doctor, and the whole concept of regeneration hasn't even been come up with yet. But the way he plays the character is so sort of intense and very grouchy, and slowly becoming slightly more sort of human, but you're very aware he's an alien. And because my two favourite Doctors are Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy, I kind of see a lot of Hartnell in both of them in different ways. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of Hartnell when I get round to seeing him, which isn't very often, unfortunately, because most of the Hartnell stuff I know of is from reading the novelizations of the TV stories. Because, of course, before VCR, they decided what they'd do is they'd get the scriptwriter to write it into a novelization so you could take it home and read it.
Of course. Right. Well, as I have a tendency to go around alphabetically, Koki, this was the return of last week's writer, Ian Stewart Black, but aided by Kit Pedler, which means that we actually have, if you were curious, there's actually somebody who understands science on the team now. And Kit Pedler will have a striking influence on the show to come. But your first time ever watching the War Machines, what did you think?
I thought it interesting, On the one hand, it seems very tropey, very cliche, but then on the other hand, I realized, oh, wait, this was before Terminator. This was before The Matrix. This was before, the story going on. And actually, it kind of shows that, you see a bit more of a Frankenstein type of inspiration. Even if it is a machine, it has that same sort of theme of the creation turning on on its master.
Yeah.
So, I thought it was cool to sort of see, like, one of the earlier renditions of this when it transitioned from, creating a homunculus to creating a machine. So, I guess anthropologically you can say I find it incredibly compelling. There was some combat, I think, at some point. I just remember I had absolutely no interest in it. The effects were not that good, but, that's basically what I say. I like some of the scenarios. I like some of the dialogue.
there's a funny thing with the action scenes in this. I think part of the reason the War Machines were able to jam all the guns was because of the fact they couldn't afford the blanks for the guns, or something like that. I seem to remember that story going around at one point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just remember being like so incredibly unimpressed that I'm like, oh, shiny, and I just left the video running. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm watching Doctor Who. That being said, I did like, a lot of the serial. The scene with the youth on their own made me cringe. There's just so much wrong with them. Socially. I'm not talking about like the writing or anything, because this clearly reflects the values of the time. But it's just like, why are people harassing one another? Why is there a fight breaking out? Why does he feel like he has the authority to break in and sort of, it just struck me as, it almost looked like watching chimps in a cage start a fight over something. It's just, and I'm not sure how much of it is genuinely what values people had, or how much was how the adults of the time saw the youth at the time. But, I did find it cringeworthy for a couple of reasons, which I guess we'll talk about.
If they are plastering "this is the youth of the era" on the screen, of course that's the trouble though, because as you say, you can forget how old it is, and it's the first complete story to be contemporary, and it's so contemporary to its time. It's literally the BT Tower, which I think might be London's first skyscraper. So it was a big deal. Well, sorry, when I was growing up, it was called the BT Tower because the British Telecom bought it. It's like Post Office Tower at the time. It would have been a big deal. So they make something of it in Doctor Who. If you were a kid in London, you'd know it, and it would be like, because still to this day, something new appears, like what some people call I can't think of what it was. What do we call it? Well, I call it the butt plug. Well, the gherkin.
There's the gherkin and there's the shard now, which is the one that melts things on the street because it's got so much glass in it and it refracts the sunlight in, and it's actually been known to hurt people on the street because it's just too much glass in one building. Speaking of that architecture-wise, at university I did a course on the history of science fiction. And in the 1920s, there was a architectural school that was heavily influencing science fiction, which was all about, it was called futurism, and it was all about using lots and lots of glass. And it seems like now we've got to the sort of point that a lot of the science fiction writers at the time were projecting their stories into. We seem to be architects seem to be almost obliged to actually build these things, despite how actually impractical they are.
Right. I was going to say, because a central London building is at bomb risk, and the one thing, if the bomb doesn't do much damage, I remember when they tried to blow up Canary Wharf, they did manage to shatter the windows. So it sort of seems very impractical for a place like London. Yes. But so if you were a kid in London, and I can remember actually coming out of Liverpool Street Station one day, seeing the gherkin, and I obviously hadn't been there for a while, so I was like, where the hell did that come from? And I think you could imagine that you could turn a corner and there'd be a war machine, but the trouble is that when you make it contemporary, and no Ian and Barbara, he doesn't nip off. Maybe he does nip off and say hello to Ian and Barbara. We just don't see it. But of course, the Doctor's old friend Sir Giles. Of course, because we've heard so much about him. Sir Giles, presumably his best buddy before he met Ian and Barbara, and so on. But yeah, being very contemporary means it's very dated.
Well, that's the reason why, of all British sitcoms, the one that gets the most repeats and the most reviewing is Dad's Army, because it's a show that was made in the 70s about the 1940s, so it can't date itself.
The same is true of Porridge, because it was set in a prison.
Oh, yeah.
But
Also, that
Porridge
had an inbuilt audience because prisoners did actually watch it, and during the time it was being shown and it was being filmed, one of the things on the official British penal system code for minor infraction punishment was not being allowed to watch Porridge.
Excellent. And of course, when they did a sequel show to Porridge, Going Straight, where obviously for Koki, they had the same character outside of prison, and suddenly it's all the big collars and flared trousers, and all the colours are too loud, and that never gets repeated because it's so dated, it's painful to watch. But when you keep it in a prison, it could be any era, and I get that shock with Fawlty Towers because just once in a while somebody will walk in wearing flares, and you're reminded it's the 70s. It's like, oh, but yeah, and so this is so 1960s. It almost makes me think of a comedy sketch mocking 60s TV. I think some 70s Doctor Who is very, very 70s, as I recall. But yes.
This actually had sort of an Austin Powers feel to it, now that I think about it, that whole club scene.
It was very groovy.
I loved it when what's-her-name Kitty turned around and says, "Oh, I'm digging your threads, Doctor." That's amazing.
It's just mental. Yeah. You don't know whether to laugh or cringe at certain points. It's true. Ian, clearly you were very enthusiastic about this.
Oh yeah. Well, I like how just because as is now a cliche. Obviously, we know with the whole the machines will take over things. I mean, what's his name on the Young Turks? Cenk Uygur makes jokes about it all the time whenever they do a technology story. But it wasn't a cliche then, and seeing how humans, this doctor, as clever as he is, thinks, "Oh, I'll build this computer system that will solve all the world's problems and sort it out," not actually cottoning on that the problems with the world are the fact that people are gits. So the computer will logically decide, let's go after the gits.
Yeah. Yes. I would say when it comes to what now seem to be tropes, what now seem to be cliches, we've got to bear in mind that, try and imagine a world where most people don't know what a computer is. In fact, the word computer meant something else then. Like a computer was somebody you hired to compute. So this sense of the word, when William Hartnell, because obviously William Hartnell, we know he sometimes misremembers lines or trips over lines, and he was having increasing difficulty remembering lines. But the fact of the matter is, when he talks about a computer program and things like that, you can kind of tell that there's no relationship between the words he's saying and the meaning. You've got to have somebody born in the Edwardian era who went from being in the army to being an actor, has got no cause to understand science or computing or anything, and obviously,
it was only a few years earlier that the one of the most common computing terms we now have, bug, came into existence by accident, which involved the late 1950s when the U.S. military were using computers for targeting on battleships. A young petty officer, I can't remember her name, had to fill out a form report for a failure in the computer, and she wrote down valve misfire due to bug, and now everyone thought that was a technical term but it wasn't. It was she literally found a glowworm and crawled into the back of her computer. So
wow.
The whole origin of the word bug is because of a literal glowworm crawled into her computer.
Wow, the original computer bug. Wow, yeah. That's quite something. I hope that's in a museum somewhere. Preserved remains of the first ever computer bug. So yeah, it's, as I say, a difficult time to sort of imagine for us that William Hartnell probably didn't know what a computer program. Well, the way that they spoon feed the audience all these things, assuming that a lot of people watching wouldn't know. So yeah, it's another reminder. We're watching one of the shows that invented the cliches. And
wasn't this around the time the head of IBM said that the idea of wanting a regular individual wanting a computer in their home was preposterous, or something? I seem to remember that being around this time.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. So, yeah, a computer was a massive room full of reams of tape and things like that. And for some reason, a very spooky voice. And an insistence that the Doctor's surname is Who, but let's try and forget that.
Oh, yeah. Another thing with the crediting, they credit the voice, they credit Wotan as Wotan, which is a nod back to the Universal monster films, where they would never credit the monster himself. Like Frankenstein. They said the monster, question mark. Or the bride, question mark.
Yeah, I thought that it was particularly interesting that both the computer and the doctor were referring, the scientist rather, were referring to the Doctor as Doctor Who. And I actually rewatched the first episode. Did he introduce himself as Doctor Who? Why are they calling him Doctor Who? The computer just insisted it? I don't remember.
It seems very strange that this computer that knows everything, like it knows what TARDIS stands for, and somehow, I don't know, I think there probably are attempts to explain this within the fandom, but I think...
I thought of something, which is that it's, when he first says it, it's a Doctor Who is required.
Yes, that's what I thought, that he was saying that, but then he repeated Doctor Who is required, and then the scientist says, we need to find this Doctor Who, or something like that.
So the scientist is stupid, not the computer.
Okay.
the computer misspoke twice, though, without saying a Doctor Who is required.
The Doctor Who is required.
Yeah.
Okay, let's blame it on a glowworm.
Oh yeah, it could be a glowworm.
Yeah, a glowworm did it.
Okay.
Yes. So, from a technological standpoint, this was probably an amazing thing at the time. And while the war machines, they're not Daleks, they're not, it was sort of, I suppose, yes, all right, they are actually a bit slow and a bit clumsy and cumbersome, and you think, really? This would take over the world? I'm more fascinated by the idea of Wotan being able to talk to other computers across the world, where you realise this is Doctor Who predicting the internet, and the internet posing a threat to human liberty or human survival.
Yeah,
that is an interesting thought. I was kind of joking. It's like, they couldn't predict drones. They just basically made new Daleks. But yeah, they had the internet. Actually, at the beginning of the show, because I saw the first episode twice, didn't Dodo say, what are Daleks? He was like, I hope you never have to know. And in that episode, they essentially have these Daleks. I mean, they're not creatures in the machine, but, the war machines are similar to Daleks in a lot of ways.
The weapons.
Yeah. I think maybe, yeah.
The weapons are very much like what we now know as Dalek rad projectors, which of course then shot smoke, because smoke looked better than a flash effect. But I find it rather funny that the totally logical computer comes to the same conclusion that the obviously very emotional Davros came to in Genesis, which is that essentially his the dominant species are the problem, and if we get rid of them, replace them with a better species.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And of course, just to explain, in the movies, Koki, the Daleks spray a kind of smoke, so it's a gas weapon. So yeah, but okay, I'm going to address the elephant in the room, because of course, in previous episodes of this show, I've talked about the introduction and development of Dodo, who, just as she was getting good, they got rid of. which is basically Jackie Lane being shafted. She was actually fired, if I recall correctly, when basically they thought the character wasn't working. But it seemed to me that they unceremoniously write her out when her previous serial, as we discussed, was a really good serial and she was really good in it. But we now have the new characters, Ben and Polly. So, Koki, brief thoughts on the Dodo era and your first impression of Ben and Polly.
You know, I thought Dodo had a lot of potential, and it kind of sucked that, you know, she doesn't even get a goodbye. She just, like, you know, the new companion passes it on. And I did not like these characters. These new companions. I guess I have to get used to them, but it just made me cringe. You know, he's bummed out. She won't leave him alone. And then you have this, it's just, I don't...
They're a British trope, that's the thing, those two characters. Ever since Shakespeare wrote Much Ado About Nothing, it's basically Beatrice and, what's his name, the two that are such a lovely couple, but they just utterly hate each other's guts. That's how I see them, anyway.
So, I hope they'll get better, but these new companions right now, they've made me do nothing but cringe.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to miss Dodo. You know, you phrased it correctly. She got shafted. You know, she was written poorly, very poorly. And then, you know, she was finally getting good, and she's gone.
Yeah. And Ian, obviously you haven't seen all of the Hartnells up until this point, or necessarily the ones that come after. But I don't even know if you've seen any other Dodo ones or any other Ben and Polly ones. But your feeling on the departing Dodo and the
at least she wasn't married off, which is the fate of most female companions from now on in, isn't it? A lot of them get married off, and it's always...
So far, that's how they've got rid of Susan, it's how they got rid of Vicky. But yeah, okay, so they got goodbyes, but they did leave because they fell in love with men they'd known for a week. So yeah, so they've shafted... Not, right, is that... I don't think it's the standard from here on in, but I think it does happen again.
I mean, the only time it worked for me was Joe Grant.
Right.
Because Joe Grant, it made total sense, and there was that whole scene, there's no dialogue at all in that scene, which Russell T Davies could really have learnt from that scene in the new series, because there's no dialogue at all in that scene. It's all implicit. The Doctor's just sat there, grumpy at their engagement party, and then he just gets up, walks out, gets into Bessie, drives off into the sunset. That was just brilliant. And they didn't even need to say anything. It was just brilliantly done.
And Koki, sorry for the spoilers, but we won't be getting round to that for a long time. You'll have time to forget.
Okay.
Sorry. No, it's okay. But basically, I want to raise another elephant in the room, which is actually, I've misremembered this, because I thought, it's very 60s. Aniki Wills, who plays Polly, she introduces legs to Doctor Who. She's the first miniskirt companion. She's not actually wearing a miniskirt in this episode, but I think possibly her dress is quite short. Now, I kind of have mixed feelings, because the sense that I get is that there is a bit of rape culture and a bit of victim blaming. But I'm wondering if, because I think the BBC were embracing its mid-60s, they're embracing that the taboo of women's legs, you know, is being challenged. But from Ben's point of view, he left a United Kingdom as a sailor, and the United Kingdom he left had a taboo for women's legs, or at least women's thighs. He's come back. And I think, does he say something to Polly, like, what do you expect? Of course things will happen if you dress like that, something like that.
That did struck me.
Be careful of who you provoke.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, so that was one of the cringier moments, yes.
Again,
sorry.
A sign of the times, but I'm thinking it's not that I don't think the show is endorsing victim blaming or rape culture. I think it's just the Ben, the character, who is a young man in the mid-60s who's been away, you know. Sorry, Ian?
I think it's more to do, as I said, with establishing that archetype of the basically they are the couple who utterly hate each other and always arguing, but you know they're going to end up together. As I said, it's a much ado about nothing type.
Yeah.
Can you really depict something like this with neither endorsing nor condemning it? I mean, that's the thing. It seems as though by depicting it, it is a kind of tacit endorsement because he never learns his lesson. He never gets any comeuppings, you know. So to say that the show itself isn't, you know, involved in it, it kind of is. Unless you, do something about it, isn't it kind of a tacit endorsement?
I suppose so. But look, to be honest, I don't know the Ben and Polly era well enough to say if I think they're well handled in terms of how they develop as characters. I do have kind of mixed feelings about that scene where, you know, well, no, we've made excuses for classic Who before. This episode was nearly 50 years old, and its archive, its period now. This is how people thought then, and of course, Ben could have been. I don't think he ever says where he's been, because of course he could have been in a place that didn't have any taboos for nudity, or could have been in. I think
James, he said the West Indies. I'm positive he said the West Indies.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, obviously, I mean, the things obviously those taboos do vary, but he would have still had expectations regarding English women, how an English woman should dress, so yes, yet another example of rape culture in Doctor Who. Hooray. Okay, I'm going to open up the floor if anyone wants to add anything else.
We'll throw a net around it. Or was it just some chords to form a triangle? See, this is why they need drones. If only they had the foresight to realize that drone strikes would be a thing. Computer-run, aircraft. But yeah, particularly the internet's still pretty cool.
Yeah, and I suppose drones would have drained the budget a bit more.
And in Shadowrun terms, the War Machines are drones. As I mentioned this on the other one, there's a role-playing game called Shadowrun, which is a very sort of near-future cyberpunky / urban fantasy type game. And the drones in that, you either have the flying kind, or you have the sort that trundle along on wheels and are basically boxes with mortars built into them.
Oh, okay. There you go.
So it's a drone. Yeah, it is a drone.
Doctor Who with internet and land drones.
Yeah. I mean, actually, we have military drones that are tracked as well, like the bomb disposal ones. So.
Oh, okay.
Well, really doesn't count as a drone. It's a pair of tank tracks with a big robotic arm strapped to it. So not quite the same thing.
Now, you say you don't have the budget to have something on a wire that looked like a plane that couldn't easily be sort of trapped by a net, but somehow they got a hold of a time and space machine. I rest my case on the budget argument.
Okay. I don't know. Honestly, I think building the time space machine used up all the budget. I think with hindsight, they wish they'd just faked it. But
they have a time machine. They can just go back in time to before when they still had the budget.
That's true. That's very true. Anyway, Right, so we've talked about the episode in general. We've talked about Dodo's departure and Ben and Polly's entrance, and we've addressed the awkwardness of the rape culture. But how strong, Koki, is your dislike of Ben and Polly? Are you actually dreading them being the companions?
I really don't like them. I'm hopeful that, this stuff won't show up in the future, that he won't say any just horrible stuff, but right now my opinion of them is very low. And, Dodo seems like a loss.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I don't know. As I say, I'm not that familiar with this era. Unfortunately, Ben and Polly, their era took the biggest. I don't know. A dent isn't even the word. There's going to be quite a few recons. I'm sorry to say. So we're going to be watching reconstructions of Ben and Polly episodes.
Oh, goody. This is going to be so much fun.
Yeah.
I can barely contain my excitement because of how ecstatic I am at this process.
And Ian, my question for you is, how enthused are you to return for future editions of Doctor Who Fridays?
Sure. Well, yeah. Well, if I can get the time, yeah, sure. I'll be happy to turn up again.
Aha. Of course, that's another thing. Yes, the War Machines is actually a season finale. So next week we will be beginning the 4th ever season of Doctor Who, with a story called The Smugglers, which is another one that I'm not that familiar with. So let's keep an open mind and see what maybe Ben and Polly will be more endearing on their first official outing as companions. And Koki, you probably can't remember what was season 2 and what was season 3, but did you have a favourite from the 3rd season?
When does the 3rd season officially start?
Hang on. Now you're asking. Damn it. What? Galaxy 4 was the season opener.
Okay, that was horrible. I'd have to say that the last one, The Savages, was probably the best.
The Savages is your favourite of... Okay. Yes. Well, I suppose it's time for final thoughts and goodbyes. So, Koki?
Clearly the machine was wrong because we have made progress. I think it's kind of silly to say that a machine would immediately say that humans are completely worthless, but I'm forgiving of it because at this point I think it was more a corrupt machine like Frankenstein's monster as opposed to, the whole trope of technological singularity just going horribly wrong. But yes, take care of your computers. And may the hamster of peaceful technological progress be upon your heads.
Amen. And Ian, your final thought and goodbye.
Who put Pertuarbo's brain in a jar in 1960? Pertuarbo being the Primarch of the Iron Warriors in Warhammer 40,000. He's a very, very logically minded guy who's known for extremes of action. Put it this way, when given command of his legion, he immediately ordered it decimated.
Right.
So yeah, it is very logical. I love the fact that Wotan is very logical thinking. He sees a problem and he just takes the most extreme solution possible. So in some ways he's not exactly logical, but he is. It's like the Cybermen. Sometimes we say, oh yeah, they're totally logical thinking machines, but other times they're shouting in rage. But yeah, it's quite fun from that point of view. Seeing the War Machines, they are bargain basement Daleks. There's no getting away from that. And one thing I did find was rather clever was the fact that essentially they had got there was a whole segment of the episode where they could literally just put their regular prop guys on screen making the props, which was really, really cost saving. Well done, guys.
Aha. One anecdote actually I know about the War Machines is that they only actually built one, and they just changed the numbers. Yeah.
Oh dear.
And if you think about it, you never see. They don't even do a split screen. You never see more than one in view. They never built more than one. I don't know if the one existing War Machine. Actually, I think it might even be a prop that they reuse at some point. Definitely, they do. They keep reusing props even into the 70s. Because in Genesis,
I may have seen the War Machine actually when I went to the Doctor Who Darpole exhibition when that was still around.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Oh.
it is just a gigantic box.
They never reuse anything from like the Zarbiers or Monatra, right?
Not to my knowledge. If they do, it's just in the background or something. When I say
Goodness.
I just mean like, for example, one of the Dravin's guns turns up in a 70s episode. And I even recognise it, because the Dravin guns are quite what's the word? Distinctive, yeah. Because they've got that kind of square shape. The original squareness gun. So yeah, one of those turns up in a 70s episode, and yeah, the reuse is quite something.
The prop that I would like to see reused the most are the surprised eyebrows.
Oh, there are some Doctor Who props that end up, because they're just hanging around, because they were left hanging around Pinewood, they ended up in other science fiction films, or so I heard.
Yeah, I think you can play, I think there's a Doctor Who spacesuit in one of the Star Wars films even.
Yes, the Mos Eisley Cantina scene.
Right, there you go.
I think one of the big ugly lizards is wearing it.
Yeah, you're right. I think Blake Seven ended up with Doctor Who props costumes, but then Blake Seven was the even cheaper sister show to Doctor Who in the 70s and 80s, and so it was like, but it was hand me down. It was like sort of borrowing things from next door where your brother is.
It did have a kind of an element of the talk. Well, not sorry, being part of the Doctor universe, but at the Torchwood at this time, in that it was very bleak and very dark and very. It's very, very fit for a podcast if you've got any ideas.
I was thinking of doing a Blake Seven podcast at some point, actually. So maybe when we get to the point when Doctor Who and Blake Seven are contemporaneous. Yeah, that would be an interesting, even though it's not actually a spin-off per se, because they were going to have Daleks in Blake Seven, and of course it was written by Terry Nation. And I think the decision was made that you didn't really need Daleks.
Well, no. By episode 2, we had a psychotic Brian Blessed, so...
Aha! Indeed. And, Brian Blessed, yes. And a man who apparently once knocked Peter Capaldi out, punching him in the face. It was a stunt that went wrong. They were both in the life of the history of Tom Jones. And, Peter Capaldi, I think, was supposed to get out of the way. So Brian Blessed threw a punch with all of his force. And actually thought, shit, have I killed him? But yes, and Cokie, if you don't know Brian Blessed, I suppose he's most famous as Julius Caesar in I, Claudius. I think you've actually watched on...
He wasn't Julius, he was Augustus.
Oh, okay. I've never actually properly watched it, or I saw some of it as a kid. But you will get Brian Blessed in Doctor Who in due course.
Actually, when you talk about the stunts he's done on screen are bad enough, but the stuff he does in real life makes it even worse. I mean, not just the climbing Everest, but the fact he's punched both a great white shark and a polar bear in the face.
Right.
Did you hear about this one?
No, I didn't know that, but I
He
see
he
the
was
biggest...
in he was in the North Pole, and this polar bear came snuffling around into his tent, and he just sort of woke up and he didn't realise what was happening. He just instinctively punched the thing in the face and it ran off. And then there was when he was doing some underwater stuff, because NASA actually are very interested in him because of his ridiculous lung capacity. That's not a joke. That is actually true, because the fact the guy is so has got such big lungs that he does a lot of studies with NASA, and a lot of it involves underwater stuff. And again, this shark came up to him and he punched it, because recently when there was that very ill-advised thing on Twitter that was asking for design your new currency. Somebody suggested, I want a picture of Brian Blessed punching both a great white shark and a polar bear at the same time.
Oh, the British money would be the best in the world if we had that. A bit of advice, people, that if you are attacked by a shark, punching it on the nose is what you're meant to do. True story.
Yeah, that's totally not an easy way to lose an arm.
True. But apparently, though, if a shark bites your arm off or your leg off, it's so quick it doesn't actually hurt. Not initially, anyway.
Well, that's good to know. So when I try to punch an arm, I won't feel a thing when I lose it. When I punch it, I lose my arm. Yeah.
It's just a scratch. Anyway, right. So, without further ado, next week we have the smugglers to discuss. So, I'll see you then. So, until then, good night, YouTube. Good night, everyone.